They mocked her. They interrupted her. They tried to destroy her reputation. But now they were the ones begging for mercy. Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to tough interviews. She had faced sharp questions, heated debates, and journalists eager to twist her words for a catchy headline. She had been in the fire before. But this time was different. This wasn't just a debate. This was an ambush. Years ago, Caroline was just a young, ambitious woman who believed that as long as you spoke the truth, you had nothing to fear. She thought that if she worked hard, stayed prepared, and presented her arguments with confidence, people would listen. She learned the hard way that the media doesn't always play fair. She still remembered her first ever live interview when she was just starting out. She had walked into the studio, bright-eyed and eager to share her ideas. But when the segment aired, her words had been edited, distorted, stripped of their meaning. The version of her that people saw on TV wasn't the woman she truly was. That night she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing for the first time, this isn't a discussion, this is a game, and it's rigged. But today, Caroline wasn't that naive young woman anymore. She had learned, she had grown, and she wasn't going to let them walk all over her again. Even before she stepped onto the stage, she sensed something was off. A production assistant, a young woman with anxious eyes, quietly approached her in the green room. Her voice was hesitant, almost afraid. "Be careful. They're not here to have a fair conversation." Caroline simply nodded. She had expected this. But the way the girl looked at her, like she knew something worse was coming, made Caroline's stomach tighten just a little. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her blazer, and walked toward the stage. The moment she stepped under the bright studio lights, she felt it. The energy in the room was all wrong. The audience wasn't neutral. There was no polite applause, no casual small talk from the hosts. The smiles on the hosts' faces were too polished, too perfect, too rehearsed. She had walked into countless studios before, but never had she felt this surrounded. She didn't know exactly what they had planned, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't an interview. This was an execution. Caroline adjusted her microphone, took a steady breath, and sat down. The first few minutes felt normal. The host smiled, reading off her introduction. His tone was friendly, but Caroline could already tell something was off. Then came the first question. "Caroline, you've been in this field for a while, but let's be honest. Do you really think you got this job based on merit, or was it just loyalty?" The room fell silent for a moment. Caroline immediately recognized the game they were playing. This wasn't about discussing policy. This wasn't about debating ideas. This was about discrediting her. The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few chuckles broke the silence. One of the hosts leaned forward, eyes gleaming, like a predator sensing weakness. Caroline felt her hands tighten slightly in her lap, but her face remained perfectly composed. "I'm here because I worked hard and earned my place. If you'd like to debate policy, I'm happy to. But if this is just about personal attacks, then I think your audience deserves better." Her voice was calm, steady, but she could feel the storm brewing. They weren't backing down. Another host smirked, tilting his head. "So you really believe it was hard work? Because from where we're sitting, it seems like loyalty is the only real qualification these days." This time the audience clapped. Caroline knew exactly what was happening. They weren't here to have a conversation. They were here to break her. But they had badly miscalculated. She tilted her head slightly, a slow smile forming. "If loyalty was the most important qualification, then maybe we should talk about why hosts like you have been sitting in these same chairs for years, despite the fact that your audience has been losing trust in you." This time the room went quiet. For the first time, the host across from her hesitated. His confidence faltered for just a second, just long enough for Caroline to see it. Then just as quickly, he recovered. He forced a chuckle, brushing off the comment like it didn't bother him. But Caroline knew better. "Oh, we haven't lost anyone's trust, Caroline. But maybe you're right. Let's get back to the real question. Do you believe you earned your position, or was it simply handed to you?" Another blow. They were trying to put her on the defensive. They wanted her to show even a flicker of frustration. Because if she did, they could twist it, edit it, turn it into a viral clip that made her look weak. But Karoline had been in this fight before. She had learned the rules. She knew exactly how to win. She raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than necessary. Then she spoke. If this position was handed to me, then surely it could be taken away just as easily. But I'm still here. And maybe instead of questioning my qualifications, you should be asking yourselves why your audience trusts me more than they trust you. This time, no one clapped. The host across from her shifted in his seat. For the first time, Karoline saw uncertainty in his eyes. They had come here expecting to tear her down, but they hadn't expected her to fight back. The interview was over. The camera stopped rolling. The studio lights dimmed. The hosts removed their mics and turned away, barely sparing Karoline a glance. She stood up, straightened her blazer, and walked out of the studio with her head held high. She knew this wasn't the end. This wasn't just about what had happened on that stage. It was about what was going to happen next. Less than an hour later, the first clips started appearing online. At first, they were carefully edited segments, clipped and polished by the network's media team to make Karoline look bad. The headlines were predictable. Karoline Leavitt loses her cool on live TV. Fiery debate. Did Karoline really earn her position? Talk show host shuts down Karoline in viral interview. They thought they could control the narrative. They were dead wrong. Within minutes, an unedited version of the interview surfaced, uploaded by a sharp-eyed viewer who had recorded the full segment. The full truth. How the media tried to humiliate Karoline Leavitt. And just like that, it spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands of comments flooded Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm not even a fan of Karoline, but this was straight-up bullying. They didn't debate her. They ambushed her. And they wonder why no one trusts the media anymore. The backlash wasn't just coming from conservatives. Even some liberal commentators admitted that the host had crossed a line. One well-known journalist tweeted, "I don't agree with Karoline on most things, but this wasn't a debate. It was an attack." A female activist chimed in, "You don't have to like Karoline to see that telling a woman she only got the job because of loyalty is beyond disgusting." Even some former supporters of the show were second-guessing themselves. The damage was done, and the network had no idea how bad it was going to get. It didn't take long before advertisers were pulled into the storm. A group of Twitter users began tagging major sponsors, demanding answers. Why are you funding a show that degrades women on national TV? If you don't pull your ads, I'll take my business elsewhere. At first, corporate PR teams ignored the noise. But then, one major sponsor caved. "We do not support divisive or unprofessional discourse. Effective immediately, we are discontinuing our sponsorship of the show." That was the first domino. Within hours, 3 more brands followed suit. And just like that, the network went into full-blown crisis mode. Leaks from inside the network started to spill out. A former producer anonymously told a reporter, "The executives are freaking out. They didn't think it would blow up like this." An internal email was leaked. "We need to get ahead of this. We have to reframe the story as a spirited debate rather than an attack." But no one was buying it anymore. People had seen the full footage. They had heard the condescending tone. They had watched Karoline hold her ground, and they weren't going to let this slide. While the media scrambled, while the hosts tried to justify their behavior, while the network desperately fought to control the damage, Karoline said nothing. No tweets, no press releases, no interviews. She simply watched. And somehow that made everything worse for them. Because while they panicked, while they rushed to spin the story in their favor, the public saw it for what it was, a cover-up. 2 days after the interview, a single report sent shockwaves through the industry. Sources say Karoline Leavitt is preparing legal action against the network. Social media erupted all over again. "Oh, they messed with the wrong person. They thought they could humiliate her. Now she's about to ruin them. Karoline, we're with you. Take them down." And just like that, the network's stock price dropped. Advertisers began reconsidering their entire relationship with the company. Executives called emergency meetings. Another internal email leaked. "If Karoline sues, this will become a full-scale disaster. We need to settle before it's too late." But what they didn't know was this. Karoline didn't want a settlement. She didn't want their hush money. She didn't want their fake apologies. She wanted justice. And the real fight? It was just beginning. Karoline sat in a dimly lit law office, staring at the stack of documents spread across the table. Across from her, Amanda Hayes, one of the country's top media litigators, was scanning an email from the network's legal team. She smirked and pushed the laptop toward Karoline. "They're scared." Karoline read the email. It was polite, too polite, carefully worded, avoiding any admission of guilt while begging for a quiet settlement. "We strongly recommend resolving this matter outside of court to avoid unnecessary conflict. Our program has always encouraged open debate and had no intention of engaging in personal attacks." Karoline exhaled slowly, then set down her coffee cup. "No deal," she said. Amanda nodded, already expecting that answer. The next few days were a storm of preparation. Karoline's legal team began assembling every piece of evidence to build an airtight case. Leaked internal emails. Clear instructions from producers. Do not let her control the conversation. Cut her off if necessary. Push her until she gets flustered. We need a viral moment. If she starts pushing back, pivot the discussion immediately. A secret recording from the control room. A producer's voice directing the crew. She's handling this too well. Cut away from her. Focus on the host. Private messages between the hosts. One of them had second thoughts. Are we going too far? Just stick to the plan. This is showbiz. It wasn't journalism. It was a setup. By the time Karoline's lawsuit was officially filed, the media exploded with the news. Karoline Leavitt takes legal action. Network faces defamation lawsuit. The ethics of journalism on trial. Will Karoline's case change the media forever? Millions of people were watching, and inside the network's headquarters, they were panicking. Executives scrambled to contain the damage. A leaked internal memo showed how bad things had gotten. If this lawsuit moves forward, we risk losing more advertisers. We must regain control of the narrative immediately. But they had already lost control. Then came the moment no one saw coming. A former senior producer at the network, a man who had worked on the very show that ambushed Karoline, came forward with a bombshell revelation. "I can't stay silent anymore." Live on a rival network, he admitted what many had suspected all along. The segment was planned in advance. The goal was never a fair discussion. It was to humiliate Karoline. The room went silent. Then the real blow. This wasn't the first time. I was part of multiple pre-show meetings where we deliberately strategized how to make conservative guests look incompetent. This wasn't just about Karoline anymore. This was an industry scandal, and the network, they had nowhere left to hide. 3 days before the first court hearing, the network made a last-ditch attempt to settle, a multi-million-dollar payout, a public apology from the show, a commitment to editorial policy changes. One condition: Karoline had to drop the lawsuit. Amanda folded her arms, looking at Karoline across the table. "This is the easy way out," she said. Karoline didn't hesitate. "I'm not looking for an easy way out. I'm looking for justice." Amanda smiled. She had known from the beginning, Karoline wasn't backing down. The trial begins. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. Some were holding signs in support. "Hold the media accountable. Truth shouldn't be manipulated. Karoline, we stand with you." Others were defending the network, still believing the show had done nothing wrong. Inside, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Journalists lined the aisles, notebooks ready, cameras rolling, waiting for every word. On one side sat Karoline and her legal team, calm, focused. On the other, the network's lawyers, rigid, uncertain. When the judge walked in, the entire room fell silent. Court is now in session. This wasn't just about Karoline anymore. This was about every person who had ever been silenced by the media. The network had started this fight, but now they were the ones on trial. That morning, the air was colder than usual. Karoline stood outside the courthouse, taking a slow, deep breath. Today would be a long day, but she wasn't afraid, not anymore. Outside, a massive crowd had gathered. Some had been there since dawn. "Hold the media accountable. We stand with Karoline." The truth cannot be manipulated. Signs waved in the air. Voices chanted in unison. But among them, there were also those defending the network, still clinging to the belief that this was just another political stunt. Two sides, one battle. But today, only one truth would prevail. Karoline adjusted her blazer and walked through the courthouse doors. The courtroom was packed. The front rows were filled with reporters. Their cameras were ready, their notebooks open, prepared to capture every word. On Karoline's side, her legal team sat calmly, fully prepared. Amanda Hayes, her lead attorney, exuded quiet confidence. On the other side, the network's lawyers sat stiffly, gripping their documents. They weren't here to find the truth. They were here to protect power. The judge entered. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. Court is now in session. The prosecution began with a powerful opening statement. This case is not just about Karoline Leavitt. This case is about fairness. It is about whether we, as a society, are willing to accept a media landscape where one side gets to manipulate the truth while the other is forced into silence. The courtroom hung on every word. Then the evidence started rolling in. Leaked internal emails. Proof that the interview had been planned as a takedown, not a fair debate. Don't let her control the conversation. Cut her off. Push her until she gets frustrated. We need a viral moment. If she starts pushing back too hard, pivot immediately. A secret recording from the control room. A producer's voice directing the show. She's handling this too well. Cut the camera angle. Focus on the host. Raw, unedited footage. Clips of past interviews showing a clear bias in how conservative and liberal guests were treated. On the screen, the courtroom watched. Karoline being interrupted again and again, her words dismissed, her arguments mocked. The room fell silent. Then came the biggest twist. A former high-ranking producer from the network walked to the witness stand. The courtroom held its breath. He took a deep breath, glanced at the lawyers who once worked for him, then spoke. "I can't stay silent anymore." Gasps rippled through the audience. "We planned the interview to break her. This was never meant to be a debate. It was an ambush." The lead attorney from the network jumped to object, but the damage was already done. And this isn't the first time. I personally sat in meetings where we strategized how to make conservative guests look weak. The goal wasn't discussion. It was destruction. For the first time, Karoline saw fear in the network's lawyers. They knew. They had already lost. Finally, Karoline was called to the stand. She didn't bring notes, no prepared statements, just herself and the truth. She looked around the courtroom, then spoke. "I didn't file this lawsuit because my feelings were hurt. I filed it because if I didn't, this would happen to someone else. And maybe next time, that person won't have the strength to fight back." The room was completely still. The media isn't supposed to be a weapon. It's supposed to be a platform for truth. But if we don't draw a line here, what's stopping them from doing this to someone else? What's stopping them from doing it to you? This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was a stand against corruption. Karoline glanced toward the jury. For the first time, she saw understanding in their eyes. People were waking up. The trial stretched on for days. Outside, millions followed every update. The case dominated news cycles, trending on every social media platform. Then, the moment of truth arrived. The jury re-entered the courtroom. A single slip of paper was handed to the judge. The tension was suffocating. The judge unfolded the paper, took a deep breath, and read, "In the case of Karoline Leavitt versus the network, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Karoline Leavitt." For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Then, an eruption. Applause broke out. Some gasped in shock. A few even burst into tears. The network had lost. The court orders the network to issue a public apology and pay significant damages to Karoline Leavitt. The show is officially canceled. An independent investigation into media ethics will begin immediately. On the other side of the room, the network's legal team sat frozen, their faces drained of color. The hosts of the show, the very people who had laughed at Karoline that day, kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. They thought they had the power, but now the power belonged to the truth. Karoline, she didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She simply stood up, looked straight ahead, and walked out of the courtroom. She knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a media revolution. The courtroom erupted in applause. Some people jumped to their feet, tears streaming down their faces. Others hugged each other as if they had just witnessed history being made. Karoline didn't react immediately. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath. This victory wasn't just for her. This was a victory for every person who had ever been manipulated by the media. This was a victory for justice. News of the lawsuit dominated headlines across the country. Karoline Leavitt wins. Major network found guilty of defamation. Media scandal. Leaked emails reveal coordinated smear campaign. Karoline's case sparks nationwide debate on journalistic ethics. And the public backlash? It was relentless. The show was canceled that very night. At first, the network tried to fight back, releasing a statement claiming they were simply restructuring their content. But no one believed them anymore. Corporate sponsors, already on edge, refused to return. Stock prices plummeted. Executives held emergency meetings, desperately searching for a way to salvage the damage. One internal email was leaked the next morning. "We underestimated the impact. We need immediate crisis control." But it was too late. The house of cards had already collapsed. A whistleblower from inside the network spoke to the press, revealing what happened behind closed doors after the verdict was announced. The executive producer slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "How the hell did we let this happen?" The lead host, the one who mocked Karoline during the interview, sat in silence, staring at the floor. He knew he was about to lose everything. They bet everything on taking Karoline down. And now, they're the ones being exposed. After the trial, Karoline stepped outside the courthouse, facing hundreds of reporters and supporters. Microphones were shoved toward her. Everyone was waiting for her first words after the victory. She looked at the crowd. She took a deep breath. And then she spoke. "I didn't fight this battle for attention. I fought this battle because the truth matters. The media should never be used as a weapon to destroy people. And today we proved that accountability is still possible." The crowd erupted in cheers. "I didn't sue them for personal revenge. I sued them because I refused to let this happen to someone else." Her words echoed across the country. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all of us. This is why people don't trust mainstream media anymore. This isn't just a legal win. This is a cultural shift. When Karoline walked away that day, she wasn't just another political figure anymore. She had become a symbol. Karoline didn't stop there. She published a book on truth and media ethics. She began speaking at events about journalistic accountability. She became a leading voice for those who had been silenced. But she never used her victory to seek revenge. She had only one goal: to make sure the truth was never manipulated again. A few months later, a friend sent Karoline an article. It was about a young woman, a college student, who had been smeared by the media. "I used to think my voice didn't matter, but after watching Karoline fight and win, I know now that I'm not alone." Karoline smiled as she read it. This wasn't just her victory. This was proof that one person can make a difference. Justice isn't for the weak, and the truth, no matter how hard they try to bury it, will always find a way to rise. Karoline had won, but this victory wasn't just hers. It was a victory for truth, for justice, and for every person who had ever been silenced by the media. This battle was never just about one bad interview, one biased show, or even one corrupt network. It was about something bigger. Karoline's story proves that we cannot allow powerful institutions to manipulate our perception of reality. It proves that when one person has the courage to stand up, an entire system can be forced to change. And now the most important question: do you believe in truth? Are you willing to fight for it? Have you ever felt like the media wasn't telling the full story? Do you believe that certain voices are silenced while others are elevated? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This story doesn't end with Karoline. It's still unfolding in the real world right now. If you believe the truth matters, if you believe justice must be defended, hit like on this video and help spread the message. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Together, let's make sure that the truth is never buried and justice is never for sale.